So let's see some examples of how to override definitions in our original class to create new behaviors in our inheriting classes, in our child classes, in our subclasses. The first mechanism, override, means that basically we are going to change, to re-implement, to recode some behavior that we had before. So in this example that we are seeing, so far we had the vampire class that had basically no difference with the RPG character class. So let's give them some. We have created a class named vampire, so we are going to model one behavior of vampires in fantasy environments, that is that they can only be hurt by special weapons. They cannot be hurt by regular cutting or being bludgeoned. They need to be hurt only with fire or magic or maybe silver or even garlic. I wonder what a garlic based weapon looks like, but I'm sure someone thought about it in some setting. So let's model this behavior. My vampire characters, so the characters that are RGP characters but also belong to the vampire subclass, are only going to be affected by these 4 different types of damage. We didn't have types of damage so far. Vampire classes add this new dimension to my class tree. Now, when I have vampire subclass characters, I will have to consider also this type of damage thing. Not when I'm using RPG characters, I'm not changing the behavior of the base class in any way, so I can still use those as I was using them. I don't have to recode anything when I use those. But when I add this new subclass, when I also consider objects of the vampire subclass, then I will have to consider these things. How? Well, I'm going to have to define it, and that's what I'm going to do. I was saying that vampires cannot be hurt by normal means. They have to be hurt by these special types of weapons. Okay? Let's first look at how this being hurt method used to work. Here it is. Okay? When anyone is hurt, okay, and we already had a damage type here, but it was always normal, we just printed the name of the character is hurt by this type, this many points, and then we just subtracted the hit points the character was hurt from the hit points that the character had at that moment. Okay, and then just, well, we made sure that we didn't have negative points at any point, so the less points that one can have is 0. But basically, the hurt method is just subtracting hit points, damage dealt hit points from existing hit points, and we did have a placeholder damage type thing there, but we didn't use it all that much. Okay. Here we are going to have exactly the same heading. So I'm still going to have the hurt method, self, HP, which will account for the damage dealt hit points, and the type. But here, the vampire class is going to behave in a slightly different way. If the damage type here is in one of these affected by, okay, on this list class attribute. So if my damage type belongs to those damage types that affect vampires as expressed in this list class attribute, then I will print a different message. The vampire reels from the fire, magic, silver, garlic damage, and then I will do the same thing that I did before. Or if the damage type is not in this vampire hurting damage type, I will just print the vampire is unaffected, and I will not subtract the hit points. Okay, so now my vampire characters will not be hurt by, for example, normal weapons. They will only be hurt by these types of damage. Okay, and let's see that in action. That's very simple. Okay, oh sorry, I have to rerun again. So where do I have? Yes, here for example. And now I can go back to the definition of the vampire that I had here. I can run it again. Yeah, no problem now. And now I can run it again. At first, as usual, defined a vampire character. This went to the vampire class, looked for an init method because I was calling it with the name of the class, didn't find it, and then went back up to the RPG character class and used the init method there. Okay, went back up to the class and used the init method there. Then I can print it using the string method again from the character class, and I get this. Behold, this sentence. I also defined another character, which is my previous character Rando, but with improved stats, and I call this variable a guy after training, and I print it too. And I get two characters with different characteristics. Mostly my Rando character is stronger and more dexterous, but has fewer hit points. And then I just make a combat. But what happens in my combat is that whenever my character swings and deals damage, because the damage that it deals is always normal, and you can check that in the code why that happens, then whenever I get into the vampire hurt method, I end up in this second branch of the if, and that means that my vampire never gets hurt. Okay? The vampire is unaffected, the vampire is unaffected, someone's swing misses, unaffected, unaffected. Rando is hurt sometimes, but not the vampire. Okay? The vampire is unaffected until eventually, usually my Rando character dies, or sometimes survives, depending on how much damage the vampire slurp managed to do to the Rando character. But in general, the main point is that Rando, our normal parent class RPG character, cannot hurt the vampire character because of this. Because I have changed the behavior of the vampire class by overriding one of its methods, by re-implementing the hurt method. It used to be basically just this part, but now I have changed it to take into account the types of damage, and because of that, now my whole code works differently. And in particular, I'm expressing the fact in this cell that you cannot hurt vampires without special weapons.